Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Take 5. It is Tuesday, April 12th, 2011, and we're concluding this passage on the death of John the Baptist. And I just got some really good advice to try to keep it together, and I will try. He is one of my heroes, and these have been hard to do the last few days, but let's finish it. Matthew 14, verse 9, "And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus." This is one of the most fascinating passages, the whole thing, just with all the drama, all the politics that's going on here. So, just to recap, there's a birthday party for King Herod. His stepdaughter dances in front of him, and he's really happy about it, really excited. He just makes an oath, just a silly oath. He says, "Whatever you want, I'll give it to you." And she goes and talks to her mother. The mother says, "I want the head of John the Baptist." That's because John had been condemning their marriage, and she wanted to shut him up. He had already been put in prison by Herod. So now Herod is sorry that he has to actually do that. And don't think this is because Herod feels some compassion for John, because we read earlier, a couple days ago, that Herod had wanted to put him to death. Herod feared the people, because John had a big following. Now, not everybody liked John, because John did preach hard things, but he did have a core of people that really liked him. And when you're the political leader, you don't like upsetting huge blocks of people. If you watch the political scene, everybody tries not to upset any major block of people. You're going to have to upset somebody. You can't avoid that, but you don't want to upset all the whatever group you want to put in there. Well, that was a significant group, those that liked John, and he didn't want to kill him, but now he has to. So he has John beheaded, and they bring his head in on a platter, and you can just imagine the scene. And I'm not sure the morals of the people at the time at that party, but if you're trying to, dip your little cocktail shrimp into the sauce there, and you got somebody's eyeball sticking out at you and something like that, I imagine it was pretty gruesome. And it was very sad. And they give it to the girl, and she gives it to her mother. And then the disciples come. And it's interesting, because if you go back early in Matthew chapter 3 or 4, and you look at John's ministry, his primary ministry was to point people to Jesus. And in some ways, that aspect of his ministry ended once Jesus began his ministry. However, obviously, God still had more work for him to do, because he still has disciples here, and he's still preaching a message of repentance. So he shifts a little bit. He always preached that method of repentance, but he shifts from steering people toward Jesus, because Jesus is doing a pretty good job of it himself at this point now. He's performing miracles, and he's teaching all over the place. So John just continues with that message of repentance. And I want to encourage you, God's not done with you. Maybe you had a primary thing that God wanted you to do, and you've done that, but if you're still alive and kicking, he's got more for you to do. And John still had more to do, and he continued to do it. And I want to say this too about John's disciples. Although John was continuing to try to point his people toward Jesus, they remained loyal to him. He just couldn't get rid of them. And there's something to be said for loyalty. Now, I'm assuming that once John died, all these guys followed Jesus. I'm sure they did, and Jesus' numbers grew. But they didn't just automatically leave John because he was pointing them toward Jesus. They had a genuine love and affection for this man, so much so that they went to Herod and asked for the body, this headless corpse, so they could give at least the body a proper burial. And there's a lot to be said for loyalty. Have you got some friends that you've had for a long time? Why don't you give one of them a call today? I called one of my old friends last night. You know, it was just good reconnecting. And oh, that person told me to keep it together and I'm about to lose it. So I'm going to go right now. Come back tomorrow. We're going to look at one of Jesus' greatest miracles on the next edition of Take 5.